Welcome to another episode of New Atlas Live. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. We're going to be talking about Taiwan mostly. We're also going to do a quick update about Ukraine. I was having some technical difficulties, so if anything pops up, just please bear with us. Angelo, how are you doing?
Doing great, Brian. A lot of things happening in the region, the Taiwan Strait. It's getting lots of tensions. What's your take? What's your take on what is happening right now with Pelosi?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about this in the context of this is the Biden administration. They're making a disaster out of everything. But if you've been following this, like you and I have been, we've seen this go on from one presidential administration to the next. This is U.S. foreign policy that stretches all the way back to the end of World War II. This is the United States and its Western allies trying to reassert themselves over an emerging China. I mean, we remember what China was like. If you study history, you will know what it was like before World War II. The Europeans and the Americans had basically begun colonizing it, and China broke out of that. I mean, when they call it the People's Liberation Army, they're talking about all of these things that they were liberating China from, not just the Japanese, not just the Kuomintang, also these Western imperialists that were occupying their country and who sought to colonize them. And so this is a continuation of this process of the U.S. trying to reassert itself, the West trying to reassert itself over China. They don't want a strong, independent China. Taiwan is one of the few remaining footholds the United States has, in or near Chinese territory. So they're going to use it for all they can. And this most recent incident with Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. I was reading a South China Morning Post article, and that they were saying what China, for some reason, keeps saying she's number 3, as if she isn't number 3 in the U.S. government. If something happens to the president, the vice president takes over, and if something happens to the vice president, the Speaker of the House takes over. That's where they get number 3 from. So she's the 3rd in line for the presidency. So she's quite a high-level representative of the U.S. And what is this about? This is about telling China where America can and cannot go, even when it's within territory the U.S. recognizes is considered Chinese territory. We're going to go into all of that, the One China policy, and how this isn't just the U.S. backtracking on a bilateral agreement they made with China, but this is the United States violating international law. They're pointing their finger at Russia about sovereignty in regards to Ukraine, and yet they're blatantly violating Chinese sovereignty and territorial integrity over Taiwan. Is there anything you want to add to that? Angela, you've actually been to Taiwan. You want to tell people about when that was and what it was like then, and the relationship Taiwan has with the mainland. You want to get into a little bit of that, kind of give a background for people?
Absolutely. I just want to remind people that are following this channel. We've done actually 2 episodes, right, Brian? 2 inflection episodes regarding Taiwan. So I suggest, actually back then we did cover some history facts about Taiwan. So I used to live in Taiwan 27 years ago, and actually back then Taiwanese were they would talk to about being Chinese. So Taiwan is a very young democracy. Taiwan has been a democracy since only the late 80s, because it was a martial law. Because since 1949, it's been still in with a lot of tensions between Taiwan and China. So I was in Taiwan, living there, and they would define themselves as being Chinese. But what happens is that in Taiwan, since then, there's been a lot of foreign meddling, especially to the National Endowment for Democracy, heavy funding. You have we've covered also the DPP, the Pro-Independence Party of Taiwan. She's basically a puppet. We found some article, some documents through WikiLeaks. Remember, she was having secret meetings with AIT, which is the de facto U.S. embassy in Taiwan. And she was basically giving information secretly to the embassy. And so she's been propped up How do they do that? I mean, not only there's a support logistically and financially, but what they do is that they build this image abroad. So she gets on Time magazine, as being that great personality, and she's being portrayed as like very liberal, the choice of the West. So this is how actually she was propped up since 2004, and so it's very important to understand that there's a lot of meddling. And Taiwan, I mean, can we define Taiwan as a democracy? I mean, you and I, we always say that the foundation of democracy is self-determination. So if there is Western foreign meddling, by definition, it's not a democracy. It's been hijacked. Taiwan. So here, what we have is an unfinished war. Since 1949, there was a war between the Kuomintang and China and the communists, and you have the Kuomintang that left Taiwan. And since then, both sides, they recognize that there is only one China, and including the international community. But now you have this, what the US call this strategic ambiguity. It's to poke China. Just go back to the agreements that actually are the foundation of the relationship between the US and China. When actually the US chose China as the sole representative of China, so in the 70s, there was a switch from Taiwan to China as being the sole representative of China. That was the foundation of the relationship between China and Taiwan.
So you're talking about this agreement the United States made, and we're not making this up. This is on the U.S. State Department's website, and even though they've edited it many times, even the current version, it says, "We do not support Taiwan independence." And I can't tell you how many Americans I've been talking to about China and Taiwan, and they say, "Why can't China just leave Taiwan alone?" It's because it's part of China. That's why. It's not a country. If the United States is saying in black and white right here, we do not support Taiwan independence, it means Taiwan is not independent. And if they're not independent, who are they dependent on? They're dependent on the People's Republic of China. It's part of China. Now, Angelo, you tell me if I've got this right. There was a civil war in China. The U.S. had been backing the Republic of China. They lost, and they fled to the furthest corner of China that they could, where they would be safe, Taiwan, the island of Taiwan. And that first generation clearly lost the Civil War. What they should have done was reconcile with the mainland, but they did not. They were stubborn. And that generation died out in the Kuomintang. Later generations of leadership began accepting the reality of their situation, that independence would not suit their best interests, that there was no way they were going to reassert control over all of China. People have to remember, it's the Republic of China. Taiwan is like a common name, but the actual name of the government, what it calls itself, is the Republic of China. They see themselves as the leaders of all of China. But because that was unrealistic, they accepted the status quo. And as a matter of fact, they began toward a path of reunification. And as you always say, Angela, like a one country, two systems sort of arrangement. This is what Beijing would be willing to offer them. And reunification was taking place. And in economic terms, we've talked about this a lot also. The Taiwanese economy is completely integrated and dependent on the mainland. A lot of people say China is going to invade Taiwan, but actually all they would have to do to completely destroy Taiwan is just stop trading with them. They don't even need to do a blockade. They could just stop trading with them, and their economy would crater.
Can I add one more thing?
Well,
in 2014, there was actually China and Taiwan were extremely close to be reunited. There was this free trade agreement. It was, I mean, think about it. There's 50% of trade export of Taiwan that goes to the mainland. So there's an integration, but this free trade agreement was a further integration, and the ultimate goal was a reunification. And as you mentioned, maintain a one country, two system, meaning that they could have their own system, political system, and they could even keep their armed forces. So it was just for China. It's a matter of pride. It's a, they don't need to meddle into Taiwan's politics. And actually, they would even propose that Taiwanese politicians could actually represent Taiwan in Beijing, but you wouldn't have representative of Beijing in Taiwan. So what happened in 2014, 15, actually 2014, you had actually the Sunflower Revolution that actually we covered. That's a colored revolution that was instigated by the US. And you had kids that were actually there that took actually the Legislative Council. It was very, very aggressive. And because of that trade agreement never materialized. I want to point out that generation of kids that actually took the Legislative Council of Taiwan, they were the generation that actually had studied under the new books that were imposed by the DPP of Chen Shui-bian. The president in 2004 was Chen Shui-bian.
Yeah.
What he did was to rewrite the history of Taiwan, just pushing for this new identity and actually decouple the history of Taiwan and China. So you have in 2014 that generation of brainwashed kids that actually would start saying, well, we are not Chinese, we are Taiwanese. I just want to point out one more thing, is that a lot of people say, well, Taiwanese want to become independent. That is not true. Even the one that wants independence, they say, we want independence, but we favor the status quo. No one, there's a very, very, very small minority in Taiwan that says we want independence now. Because they know that the scenario will be Ukraine scenario. It's an economic suicide, and they know that overnight, first of all, it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it would be impossible. Just a constitution, they wouldn't have the support. It would be just impossible to do that. So you see, even Taiwan, when she's talking, she needs to be extremely careful, because the law doesn't allow her to say that we are independent states.
Yes. And so what I was saying was the Kuomintang were the original, they were the original creators of the Republic of China. And even they gave up on the idea of independence or the Republic of China asserting authority over all of China. They gave up on that. And so the whole notion of Taiwan becoming independent, the actual real notion of it, was extinct. It went extinct. And what the United States did was resurrect it in the form of the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, who is currently running Taiwanese politics. And that's what they were doing, just like you said, Angelo, changing the textbooks to brainwash kids. And how are they doing all this? I want to show people this. Everyone that follows my work, they're familiar with the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED. Well, Taiwan has the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. And if you go through it, all it is a National Endowment for Democracy franchise opened up in Taiwan. You have Americans, like white guys, walking around in Taiwan talking about Taiwanese democracy. And what it is the mechanisms of modern day imperialism. This is not self-determination. This organization, the DPP, would not exist without U.S. government money flowing in to Taiwan's internal political affairs. And this is what China is constantly talking about in terms of the U.S. meddling. They have, again, we showed people this, where the U.S. itself says it does not. Well, this is the original version. They do not support Taiwan independence, and yet the DPP solely exists. A pro-independence political party only exists because of U.S. support, and the military that they have at their disposal only exists because of the United States. Would not exist without it. When you look at a map, just look at how far Taiwan is from the United States versus how far it is from mainland China. I mean, it's very obvious that this is the U.S. reaching all the way across an entire ocean, all the way to the other side of the planet, and creating this problem. And what I've noticed, this might be a little off topic, but what I've noticed is a lot of these people who hate China, whether they're politicians or they're just average people you find across the West, they love Taiwan because these are Asians who throw themselves at anything Western. I mean, they're at the feet of anything conceivably Western, groveling at it and wanting to adopt it. And this is why they like Taiwan. Otherwise, they have no use for Asian people. China, Japan, anywhere, because they have their own way of doing things. And these type of people cannot accept that. And worse still for them, China is a rising country. It is going to be the most powerful country on earth, economically, militarily, and people like this cannot accept it. So that's what's at the very root of this. And it's not just racist people you meet online or out in public. The political class running the United States and a lot of Western Europe, they also think exactly the same way. The type of things that, for example, let's take a look at this article from, this one, Newsweek. China military says it won't sit back if Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan. Now, I want to look at some of the comments that were made by U.S. representatives. Let me see if I can find one of them. Angelo, do you know what I'm talking about? This mentality toward Taiwan. So here, Representative Ro Khanna, a California Democrat who sits on the House Armed Services Committee, told CNN that Pelosi shouldn't call off her visit. We're not going to let the Chinese Communist Party, which does not exist. There's the Communist Party of China. The Chinese Communist Party does not exist. Dictate where the Speaker of the House should go. This is about America insisting that they can travel literally anywhere around the world, even across people's borders, and do what they want. And even the countries whose borders are being violated have no say in it. That is what Ro Khanna is saying. Here's Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. If she doesn't go now, she's handing China a sort of victory of sorts. What does that even mean? A victory in terms of what? In terms of protecting China's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and a victory over U.S. attempts to undermine both, which the U.S. shouldn't be doing in the first place. Angela, when you hear these type of comments, how do you interpret them?
Well, I try to look more at fact. I focus on the facts more than the words. Just to give you an example, you see how many times the US and EU has said that Ukraine will never join NATO. It was absolutely impossible. They say they will never join NATO. But then, facts, you have weapons, lots of weapons, 8 years of training of Ukrainian forces by NATO. You have a de facto integration of Ukraine into NATO. They're starting to amass troops to attack Donbass and possibly Crimea. So here, when I look at Taiwan, I look at the funding, all the funding of NGOs, the meddling to Taiwan's politics. I look at the selling of weapons to Taiwan. I look at the training. Now you have dozens of US Army personnel in Taiwan that are training Taiwanese soldiers. That is the most worrying. Words, they can still say, well, we recognize only one China, but if you start actually pouring money and you start stirring problems with the one China policy, then that's what I focus on, and the direction it's going it's very, very negative. Pelosi, I mean, to my opinion, I think she should probably go. But just think about the impact if she doesn't go. She was supposed to go 2 months ago and she canceled. The excuse was COVID. If she does cancel again, would be not a good message to the Taiwanese authorities. So, yeah, what's your take? What do you think?
Oh, well, I want to go over this question real quick because I think it's a good question. Why does the United States think China will invade Taiwan? It's not that they think China will invade Taiwan. I mean, first of all, Taiwan is part of China. So you can't really invade your own country. But what they would do is a military operation against the separatists in Taiwan. But the thing is, the U.S. wants China to do this. They want China to do this. They want to create a military crisis for China. Otherwise, time is on China's side. This is why China wants to avoid a military conflict at all costs. They have tremendous military power that is growing year to year. And there will be a point in time in the near future, I would just say a couple of years, where China's military, in terms of defending its coasts, its waters, its ability to carry out any type of operation it wants regarding Taiwan without the U.S. being able to stop them. That day is drawing very, very near. And this is why the U.S. is trying to trigger some sort of conflict before China is fully prepared for it. But as we've seen, they tried the same game with Russia regarding Ukraine, and that's not that's not unfolding very well for the United States, its allies. So I think this is a good question. I hope that helps answer it. It's about provoking China. It's about getting them to do something sooner than they're ready to do it. When we talk about Chinese military power, a lot of Chinese military systems are based on Soviet or Russian designs, which we can see in Ukraine are performing very well. China has modernized a lot of those systems. They've taken a lot of these systems several steps forward using their own technology. And so I think it would be very foolish for the United States to believe that this is, again, it's just as China says, it is playing with fire. Just as the US and Europe are being burned right now with their proxy war against Russia, this will not turn out well for the United States in regards to triggering some sort of conflict over Taiwan. I know they think that this is the best time to do it, but this is something they, if they were truly prepared to do this, they would have done it sooner. The US is out of time. They're out of time. They're acting desperately. They have no good options. But you have to ask yourself, no good options to do what? To maintain US hegemony, US primacy around the world. The US is not the biggest country, not by land mass, not by population, not by industrial base. They're not the biggest in anything except military spending. That does not allow you to control the entire planet, not anymore. Technology is leveling the playing field. China has over 4 times the population of the US. I say this every time we talk about this topic. They graduate millions more students in fields of science, technology, engineering, mathematics than the United States. These are the type of people who are going to directly contribute to your economy, to producing technology, better technology in all fields. These are the people who are going to build infrastructure in China and abroad. The United States cannot compare to that, and they should not even try to. You're smaller. You have a role to play in the world among other nations. The only reason it's a problem for the United States is because it insists on imposing itself upon all other nations. They just cannot do it anymore. So at the very root of it, it is an utterly irrational foreign policy to have. And that's why they're running out of time. And that's why their options are narrowing to increasingly desperate and dangerous choices. And we can just hope that everyone else remains patient and mature and avoids something that will lead to the death of many people, just like what we're seeing in Ukraine. You have anything to add on to that, Angelo?
Yeah, well, something very important. You just mentioned a window of opportunity. One reason is that Chinese military are getting stronger and stronger. So in a few years' time, it would be just impossible just to contain China. And actually, maybe China at some point will have somehow some power projection force. But then there's another window of opportunity for the US, which is the DPP. You have this US puppet, Tsai Ing-wen. She's the replica of Juan Guaido or Zelensky for Ukraine. So this is a second mandate. This second mandate will end up in 2024. She's not popular, and there's a high probability that Kuomintang that in 2024 will take over. If the Kuomintang take over, the dream of the US to antagonize Taiwan and the mainland China will be impossible. Additional to that, what worries me actually the most, and I think we need to pay attention, is really what South Korea and especially Japan will do. We've seen that Japan in 2019, they changed, they did a reinterpretation of their constitution, saying that because it's a pacifist constitution, they cannot be aggressive. Since World War II, it was very clear Japan cannot get aggressive and invest too much into military and have this power projection force. The reinterpretation says that actually Japan could come at the help of allies. And 2 years ago, they said, well, Taiwan is an ally. You see which direction it's going. And now with the LDP, they just won the super majority, which would be just enough for amend the constitution. And this is the biggest danger, because the only way the US can contain China and really be aggressive towards China is if they can have a platform being, a place where they can launch attack on China. Otherwise, if you have a fleet on the Taiwan Strait, it would be annihilated with the new technologies, with those hypersonic missiles, very precise, would be annihilated. So now, what worries me is that, you see, they use Ukraine. They're fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian, and maybe they're going to fight Russia to the last European. In Asia, it's going to be the same. It won't be US troops dying. They are going to fight China to the last Taiwanese, if not enough, to the last Japanese, to the last Korean. That is how they do. It's a replica. It's you just fund. You create the problem on the first place. You fund, and you make sure they fight for yourself. And I want to add that also, that a lot of people say that this is about containing China. It's not. It's about containing Asia and ultimately contain the global south. Because if there's no multipolar world, and if we continue on this unipolar world, it's going to further contain the rest of the world. This is why we have this movement of BRICS, and you have more countries aligned, to BRICS. This is the hope for, more equitable world. And you see the West, collective West, is panicking. Who's actually, just look at the reaction, how they behaving. You have the West, EU, the US being irrational. There's no planification. You have sanctions, and they're weaponizing the economy and destroying the economy. But it's irrational. They're even backtracking on sanctions because it's just too much. They cannot handle that. Look at the reaction of Russia and China. It's calm. It's calm. Did Russia use sanctions? They have lots of weapons, but they don't. They could shut down the gas and destroy European economy. They don't, because there's going to be a tomorrow. And I see right now the adults in the room are Russia and China. EU and the collective West are just acting like irrational kids. They've been spoiled for hundreds of years. They thought they were the best, and they still, this sense of superiority. This is what is going to destroy them, because they should be humble. Just know about history. The collective West being hegemonic, it's an anomaly in world's history. It's only 200 years. It's been like this 200 years. But you know what? China is not emerging. It is just taking back its original position as the largest economy. Why? Because it's the largest, biggest population. And you have smart people, hardworking. Are we going to deny those people to be prosperous? You see, they're calling us, especially you. You are on the blacklist from Ukrainian. Actually, you could mention something about this. I think
I just want to throw this in, because you were just saying, why are they trying to deny the Chinese people their destiny? They're the largest country by population, large in terms of land mass and resources. So why can't they rise? And this is Biden. This is Reuters. Biden says China won't surpass U.S. as global leader on his watch. Why not? Why not? What is the reason why more people with more resources, better education, harder working, why can't they surpass the United States? Because they're not white. That's the only reason. If you study imperialism, Western imperialism, for generations, they never even made a secret out of it that everyone else was savages and it was their duty to civilize them and bring them all to heel. And that is still going on in the minds of the people in Western power. This is what they still think. That makes some people upset when I say that, but it's the truth. And if you don't like it, change it, because that is the truth. So I just wanted to throw that in there about the Ukraine blacklist. I was thinking about doing a video on it, but I'm like extremely busy and I just don't have any time to do it. And maybe if Ukraine used their time a little better, other than putting people like me on some blacklist, maybe they wouldn't be in this war in the first place. They might be doing much better for their country if they prioritized things a little better and used their time and resources more wisely. I just if people could see behind the scenes. I mean, does it look like I'm in some kind of like high value studio or something? No, I'm not. And so if I'm a threat to Ukraine, they've got much bigger problems than they even think. I don't know what else to say about that.
But this is not the first time you've been targeted. I remember you were exposed by your own U.S. embassy in Bangkok. I remember you were writing articles. I mean, it's been a decade. You're writing articles from Bangkok under the pen name of Tony Catalucci. And at some point, you had the U.S. embassy that mentioned you. So this is the case where you have your own government that is turning against your own citizen and putting you at risk. Because I personally know, I mean, I'm right now in Bangkok, same as you, but I personally know that those movements, US-backed movement in Bangkok, are violent. They kill. They don't joke. So they've been exposing you, a US citizen in Thailand, and you've been risking. I mean, right now it's a little bit calm, but there was a color revolution, and you have high tensions. Potentially could get back. So, and now you have Ukraine, exposing for what? For telling the truth. Because I just want to add up what you are doing most of the time. 95% of the time, you are using Western media, official government papers, think tank papers. You're not even using Chinese and Russian media sources, right? So you're doing that, and you're exposing the contradictions, and you becoming a danger just for that.
Yeah, and honestly, like most of my updates on Ukraine are coincide with a Pentagon briefing that is published on the Department of Defense's website. I'm literally citing Pentagon briefings, and they're calling me a Russian propagandist because I'm pointing out that what they're saying in the briefings don't make any sense. And I usually use other Western sources to point that out, the contradictions. That's all I'm doing. And if that somehow that makes me a Russian propagandist. I mean, the real problem Ukraine has is with reality. Reality is not stacking up in their favor. That's not my fault. And blaming it on people, pointing this out, is not how you solve that type of problem. And to bring this back to China and the US, they're doing the exact same thing to people pointing out the truth about China. People who live in China, Angelo, you're in China, and you can see what life is like there versus how it's depicted across the Western media, both so-called news and analysis, and also in terms of entertainment, the way they make it look like it's this gray, horrible dictatorship, or when you go to China, it looks like you're 50 years in the future. Because I've been to China, you live in China. And all people are doing is pointing that out, that this is what China is really like versus what the Western media says. And they call them, CCP shills. Why are you, China so horrible? They're picking on Taiwan. Why are you defending them? Because we went there. We saw it with our own eyes. We're being lied to about China, just like we were lied to about Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and Ukraine and Russia. This is not the first thing the Western media is telling the truth about. Now, Angela, you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I'd like to point. Yeah, well, just point to, we get this critics, like people criticizing us, in terms of ideology. I mean, calling us communist or I mean, whatever. And I think you share the same idea as me. We don't like labels. Actually, I don't call. I mean, I'm not pro-communist. I just don't even like that. Just because the labels are a good way just to put people into boxes and to antagonize them. I mean, just, if you really look at this, this is what they're doing. They antagonizing Democrats and Republicans. The more there are frictions between them, the more it gives people the illusion of democracy. So I hate those labels. And when they say, well, China is communist, well, you know what? China is using the best strategy to achieve its goal. Deng Xiaoping in 1979, that was when China did this policy of opening up, towards the world, accepting foreign investment and opening its market. Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black, as long as it catches the mouse.
Yeah.
You see, my point is that, it was not about ideology, it was about delivering. And now they're using capitalistic tools. It's a market economy to achieve their goals, and it's delivering. At the end of the day, you and I, we agree that as long as Chinese love their system, same as Russia, and then compare, Western democracies, the ultimate, they say that it's the best and so on. Popularity, how popular are you, the government you elected? How popular? The range is 30 to 40% maximum. Big, Biden is at 30%. Now compare, Putin 80%. CPC of China, Howard University study, over 90%. At the end of the day, like it or not, it's not to us Westerners to like it. It's Chinese. And you talk to Chinese and they're very happy with that. And actually, when you look at the system, it's a continuation of 2,000 years. It's a meritocracy system, meaning the best people that deliver, the best managers get to the highest level in terms of power because they've been delivering. But that's their system. So it's about perception, not only perception, they perceive it to be good, but it's been delivering. Track record, 40 years of uninterrupted prosperity, 800 million people lifted out of poverty. Then now, it's about just accepting this multipolar world. Whoever wants to use their own system, it's fine. But what I'm telling people, even that people actually are pushing for this unipolar world, they really want that at the expense of a mutual destruction. I tell them, you should never fight a war you cannot win. Even if your ideology, it's your ideology, and you think that the Western world is the best and we should impose that on the rest of the world, just think about it. Can you win that war? It's going to be mutual destruction. Because if it gets to the point which is existential, and Putin said it, and probably China would be the same, but that's nuclear war. And the next war will be fought with stones and sticks. This is where we're heading, So we can fight on ideology, okay, multipolar, unipolar, but ultimately, can you really deny those countries to exist? And I want to add up, you mentioned just before, we used to say that we wanted to bring them civilization. Now it's more subtle. Now it's you control those countries through the World Bank, IMF, the dollar. You through ideology, you want to export LGBT plus. You want to impose this global, this global system of climate change. Why do you think at COP26 China and Russia didn't want to go? Because there was a hidden agenda. So this is, and we are not climate denier, climate change denier, but people need to think further.
And China has their own policies to clean up the air and everything, and they've been actually very successful. But they want to do it on their own terms. Now, I was trying to get some questions up on the screen, but I can't find it, and there's people in the comment section. So anyway, one of the questions was, do people in Taiwan actually feel like there's going to be an invasion by China, the mainlands, or is this just the government? Like, what is there a divergence between how people feel in Taiwan and what this DPP government is claiming? Angelo, do you have any insight on that?
I think people in the street are pragmatic. I think she's just pushing just too much. You see, sometimes there's a discrepancy between the people you elect and what they are doing for you, And so we saw that with Zelensky. Zelensky came with, he sold people. We are going to make peace with the Donbass. We are going to protect Russian people, Russian language, and so on. What he did was completely the opposite. So the people, I think they were, they bought into something with the DPP, and now she's going way too much. Even though they claim to be, to have somehow, be more autonomous. It's not independence, more autonomous. But now there's a difference between wanting to be more autonomous and going towards independence. You see, yeah. But the people in the street very often are victims. You have a takeover. You have people that you elect that actually take over, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, what they were elected for.
How about this one right here? I wonder why foreigners, including some U.S. senators, can enter Taiwan without asking China for permission if Taiwan is considered as part of China. Well, it is. You saw in black and white, the U.S. considers it part of China. Every country has a one China policy, the UK, Australia, they all do. This is just an example. Again, they're trying to paint China as bad in all of this. They're the ones violating their own agreements they made with China. It's complicated because they have a separatist government with its own military that the U.S. arms. China cannot just go in there and enforce. But that's not what makes a country a country. It's its recognized borders. It's not its ability to enforce those borders. The U.S. can invade Afghanistan and then enforce the borders there. Does that make Afghanistan U.S. territory? Does that make Afghanistan an illegally occupied country? So we have to, and I'm not saying that this person is doing that, but I've seen a lot of people say, well, if the U.S. can just go there and China can't stop them, then I guess it is a country. It is not a country. Taiwan does not consider themselves a country. The U.S. does not consider Taiwan a country. They don't even have an embassy in Taiwan. And even if they did one day decide to do that, which I wouldn't rule out because they're trying to provoke China, that would not make it so. And again, this is showing you who is at the root of this problem. It is not China. It is the United States. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, the U.S. goes around the world and does anything that it wants. I mean, is Iraq a country? If the U.S. can just go into Iraq and then never leave, is it a country? Of course it's a country. This is the U.S. demonstrating to the entire world that it is the rogue nation that refuses to respect and follow international laws and norms. They are the biggest violators of both.
I think the U.S. and the EU should have other worries. When I look at, I mean, right now you have in the UK they want to elect a prime minister, and they're both saying, well, we want an anti-China policy. I mean, what good does it do to UK? I mean, who cares? I mean, ask average people in the UK. I mean, how important is China? I mean, it is so far. Why should it be the first preoccupation of British people or American people? I mean, look at how far is China. And this is an internal matter, really. I mean, Taiwan and China, that's an internal matter. I just wish people in Taiwan just would wake up to that. It is not for the good of Taiwan and Taiwanese people. If you just think for a second, if you believe that the US cares about Taiwanese, just to give an example, you know how they used Hong Kong people to push for independence, to antagonize the Beijing. Those people, they violated the law and now they're in prison, and they were used, okay, and they forget about them. It's going to be the same. Ukraine, once Ukraine will not be a state anymore, will be a failed state, no access to the sea, maybe a Balkanization, maybe a peace to Poland, a peace to Hungary, people will forget about that. Those people. Do you think for a second that EU cares about them? They don't. They don't. There's another agenda, and again, it's not even European that want that. It's their elite. I mean, they are victim. They are victim in the first place. Same as Americans. They're victim of the government. Again, we should always put the precision that it's a U.S. government, EU government, rather than saying Europe or the US, just because people we all have the same enemy. It's the elites, the elites. They hijack democracy, and ultimately, it's a diversion. Think about it, I mean, people are starving, in the collective West right now because of the stupid policies they have, especially when it comes to Russia. No, now you're gonna find a new scapegoat. Especially, imagine. I mean, right now they're losing against Ukraine. Ukraine is losing big time, despite what the Western media are telling us. I think that's a good diversion right now. Why does it switch? Yeah.
Yeah, talking about Ukraine, just remember all of the rhetoric in 2014 during the protests, the U.S. backed protests, the U.S. engineered and backed protests, and how, we hate Russia and we want to turn toward the EU and all of our problems are going to be solved once that happens. And they got exactly what they wanted. They got this client regime, this pro-U.S., pro-European regime into power, and the country collapsed. It divided and collapsed. Economically, it collapsed because they irrationally cut all of their ties with Russia. They had significant economic ties with Russia. They cut those solely for political reasons, and not their own political reasons, Washington's political reasons. They did that and they destroyed their economy, and it has not recovered since, and it never will. This is the exact same scenario the people in Taiwan face. They are being asked to make decisions that suit Washington's best interests, not their own. We always show this every single time. I'm going to show it again.
Can I add one thing, Brian?
Sure.
A big irony. A big irony is that if there is one nation that loves Ukraine, is the Russia. It's very, people don't understand that. I mean, many people don't understand that. Russia really loves Ukraine just because of the historical ties. If there is one nation that loves Taiwan, it's China. You see how it is, and you have an external people that are coming in the middle and dividing them, and that's pathetic because they're really brothers. When it's just brothers. They have so much history. They have parents. You have Ukrainians in Russia and Russian in Ukraine. It's been like this for generations. Every Ukrainian has family. Most have family in Russia. Same as Taiwan, they have family connections. So it's like someone. You imagine someone that is going to use your family at home, Brian,
and stirring up trouble,
stirring up problem. This is the link they have. How evil is that?
Yeah. Well, it is. And it's extremely transparent, and yet you'll still have people passionately argue that no, the U.S. is there to help. This is where Taiwan exported in 2020. China and Hong Kong, you add those together because they're the same exact thing. And you can see how it's like almost half. So, if China just stopped taking exports from Taiwan, their economy would have the same problems Ukraine did after 2014 when they decided to cut their ties with Russia. And you were talking about Japan, and I just want people to see this. I want people to see China again. Where did Japan export to? China, and you add Hong Kong again. It's their biggest export market. And it's the same story for South Korea also. So what is the U.S. trying to do? Just like what they did to Europe and Russia, these were nations that could have worked together and really risen together. The U.S. went in there, divided them against each other. They're taking out a huge cost from all of them. Europe more so than anyone else. Their economy is in the process of collapsing, just like Ukraine did. It's the touch of death that U.S. imperialism has, because it is not, like I said, it is not a nation working among other nations. It is a nation trying to assert itself above all other nations, and these are the consequences. It always is in imperialism all throughout history. That is always the consequence. And this is exactly what Taiwan, the people in Taiwan, this is what they face. They face the exact same scenario. I see a lot of questions about Chinese military power. What if the U.S. does this? What if the U.S. does that? I just want to point out, I think I said it already, that Chinese weapons are derived from Russian and Soviet designs. They have bought a lot of aircraft from Russia. They develop a lot of their own aircraft. They have anti-air systems based on Russian systems, which are the best in the world. Yeah, would it go nuclear if, say, China sank an aircraft carrier group? I don't know. I don't know what the U.S. is thinking. Nothing that they think or do or say now is rational. You would imagine that they would avoid that. But what I'm thinking is the U.S. really doesn't want a war. They know there's no war they can fight and win against China without going nuclear. What I do think they can do is cripple Chinese maritime trade, and then hit the economy. They have a huge submarine fleet. Their navy is stretched all around the world. China's is not. So I'm thinking that is something that they would be looking at. And if the war did unfold, it would be a lot like that. Yes, maybe some carriers would be sunk, maybe. But I think most of what the U.S. would do would be very far from China. And it would be aimed at trade. It would be aimed at disrupting trade. And then I don't know what would happen after that. There's entire papers, policy papers, written by, say, the Rand Corporation, funded by the U.S. government, that make this argument that would be the best way to fight China. So they're trying to do this before the window closes. Yes, go ahead.
Can I add one thing? I think because a lot of people are mentioning, well, maybe China is bluffing. Just history. China took 3 times 3 superpower. They took the U.S. They fought the U.S. In Korea. And China back then was extremely weak, but actually they managed to fight against the U.S. They fought in the 60s against the USSR, nuclear power. They had skirmishes, with India, So if people think for just 1 second that China is bluffing, especially when it comes to Taiwan, they're wrong. China doesn't bluff. They do not bluff. Taiwan, for China, if Taiwan is reunited with the mainland, it will be the final end of the century of humiliation. The century of humiliation started in the mid-80s, in 1800s. And what the Chinese want is to end up this humiliation, this big humiliation. And they need to reunify Taiwan with the mainland. This is existential. I mean, you see the relation, when you look at the relationship of the US and China, China has done so many concessions to the US, saying, well, you know what, I will go on your way, especially when it was for Iraq. China closed an eye many times because they knew, I'm going to help you here, but you do not mess up with Taiwan. Taiwan is ours. Are we clear on that? Yes. Up to now. Why now? Well, it's very simple. China has become the largest economy. In GDP purchasing power parity, China has surpassed the US. And you see clearly the US is declining. Additional to that, the dollar, it's the end of the dollar hegemony. It's losing. So now it's about how are we going to do this transition? Are we going to be adults? Or are we going to go for mutual destruction? I mean, just, you contain, think about it. You want to contain Chinese economy. Well, think about the sanctions, just the sanctions where we put on Russia. The impact of sanctions against China, if we are going full on China, it's going to be complete destruction. And I think, they did already a mistake with Ukraine. Do you want to do again the same mistake with China? That is madness. Einstein said madness is keeping doing the same thing and expecting different result.
Yeah, that's true. But you have to realize that empire has a momentum of itself, and it's very hard to change the course of empire. It's very hard to take an empire, realize it's unsustainable, and steer it towards something that is sustainable. And before you even do that, you have to have the will to want to do that. And I think we could all agree that the current people running the US, not just the politicians, but the people who tell the politicians what their policy is going to be, they're still bent on hegemony. They have no respect for anyone else. They refuse to show any respect, as this whole Taiwan issue proves. This is about respect. It is part of China. You yourself agreed that it was part of China. but you will not show them respect. Who is China to tell us where we can and cannot go inside China? It's that ridiculous. That is their mentality. Here's this question. Pelosi, she's going to Singapore, South Korea, Japan, but why Malaysia? And the United States thinks, or yes, it's a good question. They think, or they would like to think, that there is a way for them to take all of ASEAN, including countries like Thailand, when Aung San Suu Kyi was in Myanmar, get all of these countries, unite them against China the same way they've got Eastern Europe lined up against Russia. And as you can see, Eastern Europe is a basket case because of that, because they irrationally refuse to do business with Russia, and they allow themselves to be used as battering rams against Russia. The same exact process, this is what the U.S. has in mind for Southeast Asia. Malaysia, under Anwar Ibrahim, he's got this, opposition movement. They've got this group called Bursi. They come out and protest every once in a while. It's all part of this regional network that the U.S. sponsors and is trying to use to get these client regimes into power so that they could do this anti-China agenda, get this thing going. Otherwise, all of these countries are doing more and more business with China and tolerating less and less interference from the U.S., because that's what the U.S. does interference. They sell weapons that nobody wants. They're too expensive. They don't have any edge in terms of performance. And other than that, the U.S. interferes politically. That it is a big export market, but that's not something the U.S. government's responsible for. That's something companies in America are responsible for. And countries here in the region and elsewhere around the world, they want access to that export market. But, some of them are just saying maybe it's not worth the trouble because of all these things we have to do that the U.S. tells us to do to keep access to that market. Maybe it's not worth it. As President Xi Jinping said, China's economy is an ocean. It's a sea. It's not a pond. And even if all of their global trade at sea was cut off, they still have that border with Russia and Central Asia and now Southeast Asia, high-speed railing through Laos. There's a lot of trade that they can still do. I think it's very foolhardy for the United States to think that there's any chance of them doing this. China is a great country, great in terms of size, in terms of history, in terms of power. You're not gonna get rid of them with just sanctions. And Russia should have already have taught them that lesson. But like you said, Angelo, they're all bad options. They have no good options. So they're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, no matter how futile.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they call this isolation of Russia, isolation of China. You see, in terms of figures, are China isolated? Are Russia isolated? That's exactly the opposite that happened. The EU has isolated itself, and so has the US. And again, we mentioned this quite a few times, but how many real allies the US has? And I think there are probably two. Really unconditional. You have the UK and Australia, but then others are hostages. For the simple fact that, when you have 40, 50,000 troops in South Korea, in Japan, on their soil, and you have the same in Germany and Italy, and coincidence, those are all countries that lost World War II. And then you have, the hijacking of the democracy. We know that the CIA poured lots of money into Italy's politics. The May 68 in France was a color revolution, again, meddling. LDP, there's an article, LDP of Japan, article from New York Times. The CIA in the 50s and 60s poured millions of dollars to fund this party. So, so much for allies. So we need to distinguish that. The US doesn't have many allies, just a few, and the others are hostages. And then you see this movement, especially with BRICS. BRICS could be maybe a new world order, multipolar world that could expand and actually maybe could replace the UN. I know it's a speculation. It's a bit of a stretch. What I'm saying is a bit of a stretch. But when you look at the UN was actually the new world order after World War II. And you have those 5 permanent members at the UN. and it's very it's very rigid. You have the veto, and there are limitations what can be done. It's not very democratic. I think the BRICS actually could be the start of something new that actually could be open to any countries, and especially now that you have 3.4 million people that are represented in BRICS. Well, this is we in terms of representativeness, it's going to be bigger and bigger, and they have their own institutions, banks, so I think it's something very interesting that is happening these days, and the collective West is panicking because of that.
Yeah. So we're at the 1 hour mark. I just want to, I wanted to try to get a couple more questions, like say this one right here. What about the invasion in Cyprus from Turkey? Well, how about the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, or France putting its military all over Africa? Sovereignty's definition seems to lose its meaning when it's white Western nations doing it, and then it's when it's someone they don't like doing it, someone they provoked into doing it, like Russia regarding Ukraine, then suddenly they're concerned about sovereignty because it's politically expedient for them. Angelo, what you were saying about the UN, I think the UN, the idea of the UN may be a good idea, but right now it reflects the current balance of power, which is still leaning in favor of the West, who is abusing this power. I think with BRICS and these other organizations, and as multipolarism grows, I think the UN will eventually reflect that, and it will become a more useful organization. At present time, you see the U.S. funding certain parts of the UN and certain groups that go and investigate things, and they come up with these very politically motivated reports. It's very unreliable. I think it's overstayed its welcome. I think a lot of people don't take it seriously because they understand that it really is just another vector for U.S. foreign policy objectives. So that is a problem. It's something that needs to change. And I think as China rises, as this attempt to encircle and contain Russia and China fail, as developing countries start to rise up alongside these alternative centers of power, I think that will change. I think the UN will change. Or like you said, there will be a completely alternative institution created that actually reflects the population of the world, not just the white Western victors of World War II. And just think about it. These countries, France, UK, the United States, they all had their empires before World War II. And after World War II, they were all interested in regaining all of this lost territory. What was the Vietnam War? That was France originally trying to get their colonies back. So that's what that was. And a lot of what the US and the UK and France have been doing in Africa, it's the same game. So getting back to the original topic, Taiwan, Nancy Pelosi, her trip to Taiwan, I wouldn't rule it out just because she's not talking about it on Twitter. They're very determined to provoke something. I think the conversation around the table probably is something like this. Well, what if China's not bluffing? What are we going to do? Is there some opportunity here, or are we just going to dig our hole deeper? I think that might be the conversation. Go ahead, Angelo.
Yeah, I think these two things. We need to look at the behavior of the US, but I would actually put a very strong focus on how the Taiwanese government is going to react and what are going to be the speeches. If they are going to meet, what is going to be said. I think it's one thing that Pelosi is going to Taiwan. It's another thing about what Taiwan, the president of Taiwan, is going to say to that. And then this visit, whose initiative is that? Is it Pelosi's initiative? Is it Taiwan's initiative? Are they, did the US really push for this visit, and how much the DPP is a kind of victim? He had to go along. We just need to see what is the reaction from Taiwan. But you see, I think they're playing along. It's very hard. It's very hard to say. But this will probably define the reaction of China. And so I would really
Yeah.
look closely at what is going to be said, especially from the Taiwanese side. It's again, we need to look at that, and this is extremely sensitive. So China will really pay attention to what the Taiwanese side will say.
Yeah. One last question: does China make a distinction between the U.S. government and the American people? Yes, absolutely, absolutely, they do. They're not children throwing a tantrum over there in Beijing. They fully understand that it's a small handful of interests. I think they even understand that from one administration to the other, there are unelected special interests driving all of this. They understand this, and that's the success of multipolarism. Is they understand the root of the problem are these corporate financier interests in the West. They have created their own industry, their own alternatives to all of these Fortune 100 companies that exist in the West and have been dominating the planet. They have created their alternatives that are outperforming them, and this is what has led to their rise. They're not just protesting. They're not at some kind of war with the American people. They're competing with these unelected special interests by creating their own alternative, not just for the people in China, but for people around the world. Like just think about Huawei, and just think about the nasty fit that the U.S. threw as Huawei was gaining ground on U.S. and Western telecom corporations. Just think about that. That's at the very root of this. It's not about the Chinese people versus the American people. I truly don't think that. I've never heard anything that would suggest otherwise. Angela, anything on that, or any closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, from the Chinese side, they do love the U.S., but sometimes there's a difference between the U.S., the idea of the U.S. The U.S. has this image of, but it's an idea, and this is something that actually get it from Hollywood. Just this idea of the U.S., the freedom, and so on. But they don't like what it is. So you see the difference between liking the idea, what is represented in the subconscious mind of people, and what it is in reality, and they know it's the enemy. They know, and the maturity. What amazes me is just the maturity of political maturity of Chinese. See the difference that Chinese, they learn about Western politics. I mean, how much do Western people know about Chinese politics, other than just simplifying? They say CCP, or just those oversimplification, or it's communist. Westerners, many Westerners have become like they have a reptilian mind when it comes to China. But this is like all this brainwashing we get from Hollywood. I like to take the example, those stereotypes we have through Hollywood. When it's Russian, he's either mafia guy or if it's a woman, it's a prostitute. When it's a Chinese one, it's just like those old ideas of the yellow peril. How many actors were actually the good guys in Hollywood movies? So you see that Western ideas is really like this subconscious mind brainwashing from Hollywood. I mean, this is what, and people don't realize that, you don't realize. But when you've seen that over and over all your life, then it becomes a reptilian reaction. China, bad. Russia, bad. Rather than just, take a flight, go to China and see for yourself. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I'm not trying to push that. It's different. We want those countries to reflect our values. I mean, Westerners, it's like I've had this experience. I see many Westerners when they arrive in Asia or Russia or China, they always see with their own eyes, and they say, well, it shouldn't be like this. It should be like, and after some time you just realize, why I should be maybe more humble. And what do I have to learn from them? Maybe I have something to learn from them. And the more time passes by, the more humble we become. And this is what we're missing in the West, is this sense of superiority. If there was not this sense of superiority, we would avoid so many mistakes. Why do we want to impose upon the world all those ideology, which we call progressive, I mean, it's nice words. They say, and it's lovely. You say like liberalization. It's a nice word. There's a liberty, the roots. What does it mean? It's raping countries, raping the global south, selling state-owned assets for the benefit of Western corporation, Western elites. But they put a nice word. You see,
it's like advertising. It's like someone selling cigarettes and trying to make it look like this glamorous lifestyle, when in reality you're killing yourself. And I think that's a good analogy to explain Western imperialism. People say, Ryan, why do you hate the West so much? I don't hate the West, but I am definitely at odds with imperialism. I'm a live and let live type of person. I saw a comment, and I had put it up on the screen briefly, about how Chinese people are more willing to learn about others outside of China than Americans are. And that's definitely the truth. And that was the case with me until I left the US. And I was a person with a relatively open mind, and it was just hard to find information. And so what I'm going to say about this whole Taiwan issue, China, the United States, especially people who follow my work regarding Ukraine. You think I'm doing a good job on Ukraine, but I'm messing something up with China because I don't hate China. Wake up, because the exact same people who are lying to you about Ukraine are the exact same people who are telling you what you think you know about China, and just admit you know nothing. There's no shame in that. Admit you know nothing and start from zero and build up a real understanding of China. And just like Angelo said, which it might not be that easy to do, but go there for yourself. I was shocked. Even years of researching geopolitics and beginning my own personal awakening, I was still shocked when I went to China. And that was in 2006, 2007. And now here in Thailand, I can feel and see the impact of China's rise, and it is all positive, versus what the United States has been doing to this region for decades, and how it's being offset by China's rise. It is definitely a positive thing. And people who are telling you otherwise are the same people telling you to put a Ukrainian flag in your profile. Just keep that in mind. On that note, I want to thank you, Angelo, for joining me, taking time out of your day. I always appreciate that. I appreciate everyone who joined us live, and especially the people putting in constructive comments in the comment section. We don't do super chats. My YouTube is not monetized at all. If an ad ever pops up, just skip it, because I'm not getting anything from that. I don't monetize YouTube. If you want to support the New Atlas, please check the links in the video description below. There are also all of the links to follow Angelo on his YouTube channel and also his Twitter. I'm not allowed on Twitter, but I am allowed on Telegram. The link will be in the video description below. Thank you again, everyone. And until next time, bye for now.